I want to stay with you, Jacqueline. As someone who writes for young adults, what is something you remember from that time, from your young adulthood, that you keep in mind when you're writing books for kids now?
Such a great question. It was painful as heck. I'm gonna censor myself. But young adulthood is just such a deeply. I just remember being. My memories of it are melancholy, and I don't think I was a melancholy child, but the way that teen boys treated teen girls, I just remember like your body was full on display all the time, and verbally, commented upon often, and sometimes, even more than that. And just being a girl walking through the world of young adulthood, I think because it was so painful, I could have either I just erased it and made believe it never happened, or dove into it and make myself the hero, like rewrite the history of it, and have some power in that way. But I do remember my young adulthood, and talking to my daughter about hers, it was a very different time in terms of, even though, the 70s and 80s, we're talking, the heart of the women's rights movement and feminism and all of this stuff. But I think pre-adolescent girls and teen girls really struggled walking through the world in a very visible way.
Lauren, you were nodding your head through Jacqueline's answer. What resonated with you about her answer?
Oh, it's so hard to be a teenager. Just period. I have a 12-year-old right now. It's just hard. Life is hard. And when Jacqueline was talking about the bodies of young girls on display, that resonated very deeply because that was the moment when you wake into your sexuality and you start to feel like an object, and maybe less like the master of your own, body and fate. It's a very disorienting time for sure. That you have so much courage. I don't think I could write a YA book. I couldn't go back into that time.
It's funny because I think a lot of people can't. I think a lot of people have just left that world behind completely, because it's painful, but it's also cathartic to go back in and change the narrative.
I have a 12-year-old boy. I have a 12-year-old as well. So Colson, I'll bring you in. My son was, I think, on House Party is what it's called, and something happened with a girl, and I just heard him yell, "I'm so confused," from the other room. What was it like for you at that time? This time we've heard from the woman's point of view.
Yeah, I mean, it was a horrible time, I think, but also going back and finding material and finding a way back into it is useful. It was useful for me as an artist. My first couple of books, looking back, very, sort of cold and detached. And a real sort of breakthrough for me as a person and as a writer was writing Sag Harbor, which is about a kid growing up in the 80s. He's 50 years old and going through that moment that Jackie's describing. He's trying to figure out who he is in his family, in his community, and where he diverges from his family and the community. And it was important for me to just say, I'm gonna let it all hang out. It's horrible, it's excruciating, but because I've never done it before on the page, I'll be a better writer for doing it. And because I've avoided thinking about all those years, it will be good for me as a person just to kind of, dissect it. And, I sort of cheat because the narrator is a grown-up looking back. I couldn't have, I think, maintained a 15-year-old's POV I would have just blown up and destroyed myself. So I had to cheat by having someone looking back upon those years.
Colson, was it good for you as a person? You said you thought it would be good for you as a person, was it?
Oh, it was. I mean, I think since then, my characters have become more alive. And definitely moments in the book since when I do sort of go to a place that's uncomfortable, but also really real for me, I know that if it's real for me, it's real for somebody else. And sort of capturing that moment makes the books better. And if I can find different ways of getting at that truth, I become a better writer. At least in my own eyes. Other people can judge, for themselves.